Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we are here. We have gone through the entirety of the 2022 League of Legends regular series. We've gone through all of the playoffs. We've gone through all of Worlds, leading up to this one final moment where the two best teams in the world will face off against each other to see who will be crowned the 2022 League of Legends World Champion. I am incredibly excited for this series to kick off. Obviously, I know you guys are as well because you're watching this video. So before we jump into any of the analysis that's going to be incoming on both T1 and DRX, of course, let me know down in the comments section below what you guys think is going to happen in this series. Who do you favor and why? Where do you think the key matchups will be? And who do you think is going to come out on top because of that? You know I love hearing you guys' thoughts and opinions down in the comment section below. But it's time to jump in to our analysis. Today, we're going to be talking about one series and one series alone because there is only one left here at Worlds. I'm giddy. I'm excited. We have the 2022 World Finals between T1 and DRX. Now, two teams that I don't think a lot of people expected to be meeting each other here in the finals. Well, I don't think anybody expected to see them meeting each other in the finals, but two teams that honestly I don't think a lot of people expected to be in the World Finals in the first place. I was significantly higher on T1 as a team going into the tournament than a lot of people. I had them as the fourth best team in my power rankings going into the tournament. That was a lot higher than other analysts I saw, but even still, that wasn't quite exactly up to par with where they ended up being. This was a team that, going back to my LCK playoff predictions, you'll note that I actually had them predicted to win the LCK Summer Finals before playoffs started. I figured all the time, you can go back and listen to that analysis, that this team is simply just too talented for them not to just get their shit together. Really, their problems all year long have been self-inflicted. They really haven't been, you know, these integral, like, inbuilt problems that they can't fix. A lot of it was draft decision making and then being able to execute on the decisions that they end up playing for in draft. They have a really good head on their shoulders, but oftentimes they put themselves in disadvantageous positions. That's why I think they lost to Gen G in the LCK Summer Finals, but they really have been able to overcome all of that, and a lot of that is going to be due to a couple players that we'll talk about in a bit. On the side of DRX, now, I'm probably the biggest DRX fan on YouTube when it comes to League of Legends analysts, but even I, in a million years, would have never predicted DRX to be in the World Finals. This is a team that has a bunch of players that I've just been saying, well, they could get it together, right? Well, they got it together. They have been getting it together over the course of this tournament. Not only were they really good in group stage, a lot of people forget that because they did drop that game to Rogue, and they dropped another one to Top Esports. They weren't, like, perfect, but they were still pretty good in group stage, and they showcased a lot of really interesting dynamics. They really turned it on when it got to the knockout stage. They went down 0-2 to EDG. They're able to reverse sweep them and come back and win that series from some phenomenal plays from Zika in the mid lane. Obviously, Pioshik continues to be great in the jungle. And then another phenomenal series against Gen G, where, again, they rebound after a Game 1 loss to beat what is, in my opinion, the most talented team in the world on paper. And so both of these teams, obviously, having gone through the bracket, are going into this series with a ton of momentum and versatility, but in this video, we're going to be going position by position, outlining where I think strengths and weaknesses lie for both of these teams, and then at the end, I will give a prediction. Of course, the prediction is definitely up in the air, as we've seen throughout the playoffs, or the knockout stage, I should say, at Worlds so far. The difference between the best teams in the world is really not that big. As I always say, it's a game of inches, not miles. Even if I do outline some strengths and weaknesses for each of the teams here, they can use those strengths and weaknesses to overcome any of the predictions that I make in this video. So, of course, take all that with a grain of salt, but listen to the analysis. Listen to why I go into each pick. That's where I spend a bulk of my time. So let's go ahead and get things started here as we start off going position by position with the top lane matchup. On the side of DRX, we've got Kingen. On the side of T1, we've got Zeus. And this is an incredibly interesting matchup on paper, because on paper, this should be an utter stomp. I mean, looking at it from almost any avenue over the course of the year, Zeus should be heavily, heavily favored in this top lane matchup. And while I will say he definitely is favored, it is not nearly as much as what I would have said it would have been going into the tournament. Now, it's hard to really pinpoint where exactly Kingen is as a player right now, because he has been playing incredibly well over the course of the knockout stage, but he has yet to really face like a dominant top-tier top laner at this tournament. There wasn't one in his group. I don't really think that's all that controversial to say. Otoamne and Wayward, I don't think count towards being, top tier world class top laners. They're good players, but not dominant top laners. Then you go to Flandre, yes, a world champion, but is arguably having a massively down year. He's able to beat him and honestly outplay him in that series. That looks okay. And then you move on to Doran, who I think me and a lot of other people included saw as kind of the weak link of Gen G. And so it'll be interesting now that he has to face what is, in my opinion, the best top laner in the world. It's definitely going to switch things up, but Kingen really has been on fire recently. You could argue that he went into this tournament in really good form, which is what I argued in my preview content for Worlds, that Kingen was actually in surprisingly very good form going into Worlds, and he has absolutely maintained that. He was the best top laner in Group C. He was better than Flandre. He was better than Doran, especially. He really took advantage of Doran, which is incredibly impressive. That's something Zeus wasn't really able to do in the finals, even with a lot of investment on the side of T1. So I'm not saying Kingen's better, but honestly, it's not nearly as blown away proportionally as I think a lot of people would see it on paper. Kingen is a good player who's playing some of the best League of Legends of his entire career right now. Now, you look at the stats, they don't necessarily hold up in that respect. He's negative 89 in goal difference in 15. Not ideal. His damage per minute down at 445. It's really not great. Those aren't super, comforting stats, I would say, if you're looking for Kingen to be able to just outplay and be a better player than Zeus. But on the flip side of that, what Kingen does really well, instead of dominating lane phase, is be able to take the pressure that Pyosik invests into the top side of the jungle. A lot of times, Pyosik really heavily favors things like Rift Herald early in the game. Take the pressure that he's able to create in some of the 3v3, potentially 4v4, even 5v5 skirmishes that the team tends to go for around Rift Herald, and try to pressure that into lane pressure. It's not really going to be something that's going to be dominant. He's not going to be getting a ton of resources on his own, even if Pyosik definitely tends to favor the top side of the map over the bottom side. But at the end of the day, he plays his role incredibly well, and I think in some ways he's actually a little bit underrated going into this World Finals. I don't think he is a hindrance for this DRX team. In my opinion, the top three for DRX have been the most important players for them in this run. I know that's going to get a lot of controversial opinions because we'll talk about the bot lane in a bit, but I think Kingen's role on DRX throughout the tournament so far has honestly been a tad bit overlooked. For Zeus, on the other hand, I can only talk up Kingen so much. I can talk up Zeus for hours. I mean, this is the best top laner in the world, in my opinion. He proved that in the series against JD Gaming, where, in my opinion, the two best top laners in the world faced off against each other, and Zeus was simply better. Yes, I honestly think 369 was by far the best player on JDG in that series, but that's not to take away from what Zeus was able to do. He was able to take the best player who was playing like the best player on a team that won the LPL, and he was able to beat him, and he was able to beat him consistently. You look at the stats, 515 gold difference at 15. That is absurd. That is incredibly impressive. That's not in wins or anything. That's in every game. 665 damage per minute. That's first among all top laners at this tournament. Incredibly impressive showing from Zeus so far. He is proving to everyone in the world that he very well might be the single best player on this T1 team that did end up making finals. So really, really not a lot that I can do to put him down. Now, does he have weaknesses in his game? Maybe, I don't know. Like, in a lot of cases when you see carry top laners like this, top laners that like to get resources and can really snowball the game out of control, sometimes they can struggle playing a little bit weak side. You may be able to look at that in his key picks, pretty much all of them being aggressive picks, being Yone, Gangplank, Jace. I mean, Gangplank not so much, but he still wants to carry the game, right? And even outside of that, there are other, aggressive-oriented picks that Zeus loves. The Fiora comes to mind, of course, but as I said in the LCK regular season and throughout the playoffs in the LCK, the thing that really stood out for me with Zeus, and the reason I considered him the best top laner in the world coming into this tournament, was because I think he is also super comfortable playing that weak side role. Now, Kingen does love to play weak side. We see that with Ornn, potentially even Aatrox in those key picks. Obviously, I don't think those are things that he's going to be getting all that consistently, but Zeus can do either and be a world class, like a top tier level at both. You need him on Yone, you need him on Jace, he can do that. You need him on Ornn, you need him on Maokai, he's a top tier tank player. He actually is. And that's what makes Zeus so scary, is that in draft, you can't really stop him. He's going to be able to get something that he is going to be able to do a ton on, whether that be early in the game with some of these more aggressive picks, or later in the game with, carry-oriented scalers like the Gangplank, or even tanks that just want to sit on the front of the team fight and be able to create panic for the rest of the team. He does everything at a super world-class level, and that's what makes Zeus the most difficult top laner to play against in the world. Now, where do I think the advantages lie in this matchup? Well, it would be disingenuous of me to not say it's heavily in favor of T1. Even with Kingen playing some of the best League of Legends of his career right now, Zeus is just on a different plane of existence when it comes to top laners. Top lane, in my opinion, is the weakest role in the world when it comes to depth of talent at the position. Not to say that there aren't a lot of good top laners, there just simply aren't a lot of great top laners, and that's what makes Zeus so difficult to deal with, is the fact that there really aren't a lot of players in the world that can actively match him in terms of skill level. But a player like Kingen has been outperforming the entire tournament, and it would be, pretty insane for him to do it here, but it certainly isn't out of the realm of possibility for him to have the best series of his life and be able to go toe-to-toe with Zeus. I wouldn't expect Zeus to lose super hard, but to say that Kingen can't, go toe-to-toe with him if everything moves in the right direction, I don't think that is exactly out of the realm of possibility. It's just not something that I would expect. Zeus should be the better top laner in this series, and it should be by a considerable margin. Moving on to our second lane matchup here, and this time it's not really a lane if we're going in order here, as we now have the jungle matchup between DRX's Pyosik and T1's Owner. And similarly to the top lane matchup, I think this one was firmly in favor of T1 going into the tournament, especially if we knew that it was going to be Pyosik in the jungle for DRX with how he had played the majority of the year. But unlike the top lane matchup, I actually think a lot has changed over the course of this tournament. We're going to talk about Pyosik first here, because I think there is a really strong case to be made here, and some people are not going to like this, but it's just my opinion. There's a really strong case to be made here that Pyosik has been simply better at this tournament than Owner has. Owner has been really, really good, but I think there's a really strong case that Pyosik has been the single best jungler at this tournament so far, especially over the course of the knockout stage, where it really does seem that the more important the games get in the series, the better he performs. And we've always talked about Pyosik as this kind of player. This is somebody who, at least if you've watched my channel for many years, which obviously everybody here has, why wouldn't you have watched every single one of my videos? Joking aside, if you are a longtime viewer of this channel, you'll know I've been incredibly high on Pyosik's abilities and upside as a player for many, many years. I went into this year saying that if everything went right, we'd be walking out of 2022 calling Pyosik one of the best junglers in the world. Now, did that pan out? Not really. Over the course of the LCK regular season, in fact, it looked like a pretty bad take because Pyosik actually got benched in the regional qualifier to qualify for Worlds this year for Juhan, who is a really good player, someone who a lot of fans might recognize from PSG Talon at MSI, but outside of that, really didn't even get a lot of playing time in the regular season of the LCK. There were a lot of flip-flopping rosters for DRX, but Juhan didn't really play all that much. Their fate was really in Pyosik's hands, but he was so up and down over the course of not only the regular season, but the regional qualifier as well, that he actually was benched, and Juhan was a big reason this team was able to qualify for Worlds in the first place. So to see Pyosik really show up at Worlds, not only be the best jungler on this team, which certainly going into this tournament, that was a question mark, but arguably be the best jungler at the tournament, I mean, that is just phenomenal for him, and really an encapsulation of what he has been for so many years. He has always been someone who can beat anybody on any day. I talked about that in the LCK. In fact, I brought it up constantly. I'm sure people who watch my channel are tired of hearing of it by now, quite frankly, but I brought up so frequently that every single game is a new game for Pyosik, for both good and for bad. He can win against any matchup. There were games in the LCK this season, and you can go watch them, where he obliterated Canyon, who I think a lot of people would consider one of the best junglers in the world, but there were also games where he would get run over by worse junglers by a considerable margin and actively be a detriment to his team. He has such a feast or famine playstyle. You can kind of see that in the champions that he's gone to more consistently over the course of Worlds. Of course, Kindred has to be on that list, his signature champion, although the famine doesn't really happen when he's on Kindred. Honestly, T1 might need to look to take this pick away from him. I know Kindred's not meta, but even when Kindred's not meta, Pyosik just simply doesn't have bad games with them. He is simply too consistent on that champion to be allowed to have it, but Viego, Graves, carry-oriented junglers that can take over the game with their own sets of damage that can be played into by their solo laners and by other members of the team. That is really what DRX and Pyosik have really favored over the course of the tournament. Don't expect that to change too much. Look at that first blood percentage. I have to point it out because it is actually ludicrous. That's not 53% first blood percentage in like wins. In 53% of DRX's games at Worlds, Pyosik has gotten first blood. Like, that is absurd. And that is unmatchable. Like, the aggression and the power that Pyosik has been showing, most notably around that top side, around Zika or around Kingen in the top lane, has been huge. And that's something that Owner and T1 are going to have to be incredibly aware of going into the series. DRX does like to generate leads early, and they do like to push those leads in the mid game. That's something that Pyosik definitely embodies. A 68% KP percentage, over 6 KDA for a jungler. These are all fantastic stats that really just back up the point that Pyosik has been phenomenal. But opposing him is Owner on the other side for T1. Now, Owner is no slouch. In fact, Owner's one of the best junglers in the world. He really hasn't been a focal point, I would say, for T1 over the course of the tournament so far, but he was during the regular season. That gives me confidence that he is still relatively the same player that we all thought he was going to be going into this tournament. I had him in my top 20 players at Worlds list, and I think that has really held up. How has he been, like, super flashy, super out there, like, to the same extent that he was for T1 in the playoffs and in the regular season in the LCK? Probably not, but that's okay, because honestly, a lot of the pressure that T1 was able to generate in the regular season was closer to that top side, but with an emergence of the T1 bot lane, a lot of the responsibility of Owner has been taken away a bit, with Guma and Keria playing so well. And so Owner, I definitely think, is still that guy. Like, he's definitely not as good as he was in the LCK. He's not downgraded by any means. A lot of the responsibility, I think, has just been taken off of his shoulders, and you can see that in a lot of the champions that he plays. Yes, they both play a lot of Viego, but the Sejuani has been a huge pick for Owner over the course of Worlds so far, and I think that really embodies it. Obviously, Lee Sin, always been a pick for Owner. It will always be a pick for Owner. It's never going to get out of his wheelbarrow because he's so good at it. And one thing I want to point out, a ludicrous 4 steals at this tournament so far. That's a lot. He has been incredibly consistent towards the back half of this game at being able to secure objectives, even on 50-50s. In fact, T1 has been more willing than other teams to go for those 50-50 smites towards the back half of the game. A lot of that leads me to believe that it is because of Owner that they're willing to do that, but, you know, there might be a lot of different reasons going into that. Overall, it's actually interesting to see these two match up, because I think generally going into this tournament, I would have said this was very T1 favored, but with momentum and with how these two are playing right now, if Pyosik shows up, if we get Pyo sick and not Pyo shit, he might be the better jungler in this series. He certainly has been over the course of Worlds so far, at least the more impactful one directly. Maybe not the better one, but the more directly carry-oriented impactful one. It's just going to be interesting to see if that holds up. I actually think this matchup is going to matter a ton for how this series ends up playing out. And most of that is going to have to do with whether or not Pyosik can dominate Owner in the same way that he was able to dominate JJ, and in the same way that he was able to, quite frankly, dominate Peanut, who had Owner's number all year long. It's not a direct correlation, but it is something to keep in mind. If Pyosik can really show up and be one of the best junglers in the world, this might actually be a position that I favor DRX in. That brings us to the matchup that I think a lot of people are waiting to hear about, and that is our mid lane matchup here, as we have Zika from DRX taking on Faker from T1, the multiple-time world champion, taking on someone who has emerged and really emerged at Worlds in 2022. We'll start with Zika because he's on the left, and that's how I read. Man, like, what can I say that I haven't said ad nauseum over the course of Worlds so far? I don't want to repeat myself too heavily in this video, but the best player at Worlds. I don't even think it's really all that disputable. He has been the star, the standout player of Worlds 2022 so far. Now, is he going to be able to keep that up? It's going to be an interesting proposition. He is a player that with resources can really dominate. Now, I like the way that he plays. In fact, I really think that he has a good matchup into someone like Faker, who does have a little bit of a different playstyle than I think a lot of the other top mids at this tournament. Definitely a different playstyle to players like Scout and Chovy, who Zeka has gone against over the course of this tournament so far. But you can see, even for a player in Zeka's quality, that I think shines more so in the mid-game and a lot of these split map scenarios, a lot of these frantic mid-game team fights around 15, 20 minutes into the game. He still has 151 gold difference at 15. He's positive in GD at 15. This is a player who, quite frankly, doesn't receive all that much help in the early game from his jungler. It's really not a priority for DRX to be able to get Zeka ahead, because they just know so confidently that he's going to be able to dominate if he's on his champions towards the back half of the game. You can see that in his damage per minute, which is at 467, one of the highest at the tournament. Obviously, we'll talk about Faker in a second, who's much higher than him, but that just shows how good Faker has been. And then 11 solo kills. I mean, what do you need me to tell you? The flash plays that he has made at this tournament are outstanding. Now, there are a lot of critics towards his game right now, and I think a lot of that stems from the fact that he, quote, has a small champion pool. This is something I will personally not disagree with, because I agree that, like, by their definition, it is a small champion pool, but it's not an exploitable problem. It just isn't. There are too many things that teams need to take out against DRX to be able to ban, first of all, either both Sylas and Akali, or Sylas, Akali plus Azir, plus Ahri, plus LeBlanc. These are all champions that I would consider super powerful for Zika as a whole, that he's shown throughout the tournament he's able to play at a super high level, so is he really great at assassins and that kind of playstyle? Yes. Is there any shot, really, like, realistically speaking, that you're going to consistently be able to take him off of those picks? No. He has too many strong picks. Hell, he even pulled out the Galio in Game 4 against Gen.G in order to get them here. Not a pick I would recommend, but just kind of shows that, generally speaking, this idea that he has this small champion pool at a high level, it isn't the case. Yes, is he fantastic on Sylas and Akali? And is he, like, only the best mid in the world right now on those champions? Yes, but it's not like the bar for the rest is super low. It's like, oh, he's maybe the best mid in the world right now at this tournament on Sylas and Akali, and then, oh, he's only like a top 3 mid in the world on Ahri. Like, that's still pretty freaking good. It's still a huge positive for them. And he's going to be incredibly influential if this team wants to shock the world and actually win a world championship this year. He, I'm not going to say alone, because I just, kind of shouted the praises of Pioshik in the previous segment, but for the most part, he's the reason that DRX is here. He's the best player on this team right now. He's the reason this team has been able to push forward over teams that have been much, much different than them. Yes, everybody else is also playing well, but you can't have just a team of good players. You have to at least have one great player. You have to have at least one, like, top 5 player in the world to make it to this spot. That's what Zika has been for DRX, and if he can keep that up, they're going to be in a good spot. It's just not going to be easy, because he's going against Faker. I think I've somewhat, unjustifiably gotten this reputation over the past couple days of being a Faker hater. I don't know where anybody could pick that up out of the conversations that I've had over the course of the year. I've covered the LCK all year long, and in fact, I've been much higher on Faker, I think, than a majority of people. And I actually stick with a lot of the analysis that I've given him over the course of the tournament, which is, Faker is a phenomenal carry-oriented player that has just not been given that responsibility for T1 over the course of the year. It's not really been something that they've wanted to lean into with a lot of their drafts over the course of the LCK regular season. Lissandra was his most picked champion, and I think that is indicative of what that team sees his role as. Now, that has really expanded over the course of the tournament. That was something that I was really hopeful for, especially if you remember going into LCK playoffs, my LCK playoff primer video. Talked about it a ton. Faker actually was allowed to play Ahri in his last game of the split, and I was like, oh, okay, they're finally going to let him play some of these assassins, some of these carry-oriented picks. It didn't really pan out in the playoffs. He was still kind of on Lissandra duty over the course of the LCK, but so far in the knockout stage, it's really opened up a lot for him. A lot of Akali, a lot of Sylas. Hell, even the Rise, something that he can be creative on, something that he can create pressure on his own on. I never doubted Faker's ability. It was more so in T1's willingness to give him those champions. Faker is arguably the best supportive player on this team, which is why I think they felt so comfortable putting him on these more passive picks. But at the end of the day, he's Faker, and just because he's the best supportive player doesn't mean he's also not one of the best aggressive players. It was more so just the resources that he was given. Now, he really has some strengths, and he does have some weaknesses as well. I don't want to pretend like Faker has been perfect. He's just been fantastic over the course of the knockout stage so far. Does have a negative goal difference at 15. Don't think it really matters too much. He's really been super, I don't want to say camped, but like, they definitely have had a priority on other lanes when it comes to T1. Owner is often either top or he's bot. He is never mid, like at all. They are not putting pressure into this mid lane spot. It often causes Faker to get shoved in and get pressured out and just not be available for a ton of the other plays. That's okay. You're okay taking an early lead if it means you're going to be able to dominate late. Now, on a lot of different players, I would say that's a weakness, but on Faker, with the fact that he's so good in late game teamfights, it honestly doesn't matter. He can be down 500 gold, and I'm still going to favor him in a 1v1 in a side lane against a bunch of other players in this game. And so, in a general stance, I don't think that's a positive, but it is something to look at. 593 damage per minute is actually ludicrous right now. Like, considering he's played so many games on non-aggressive champions, things like the Rise, things like the Galio, right? It's just insane to see 593 damage per minute. It just shows how active Faker has been in a lot of these fights, and that's really where I come back to, where Faker might not have the laning prowess right now that he had in his, like, quote-unquote prime, like 2016 or whatever. He is just as good of a team fighter now as he has ever been, and I think that definitely stands out. When you put him on Sylas, when you put him on Akali, he can really take over a lot of these late-game team fights if the rest of the team lets him set up. Now, again, he's not going to be getting a lot of resources to be able to do a lot of these things, but for the most part, it's Faker, and he doesn't need them. That kind of contributes to his gold difference, it kind of contributes to his KDA, but at the end of the day, those are just stats that don't really matter as long as he's affecting the game in the way that he wants to. So where do I actually think the advantage lies? Well, it's incredibly tough, because at the end of the day, these two are incredibly consistent, and I would say the most likely scenario is that both of them have a fantastic World Finals. I really would be surprised if either of them just got completely shown up at Worlds. I think one thing that a lot of people forget is that you can have a matchup between two players of the same role in a series, and both of them can play well. That's something that I really wish a lot of people took away from some of the series. Zeus and 369 in the T1 JDG series. 369 had a great series. Doesn't mean that Zeus had a bad series, you know what I mean, kind of thing. And I think a lot of people should take that away from, like, the JDG Rogue series as well, where Larson was really good. That doesn't mean Yagao played bad. Like, that kind of mentality, right? Where one doesn't have to be bad in order for the other to be good. I highly expect and anticipate both of them to have really good World Finals. Zika's definitely a little bit more volatile, but I honestly think he has a much higher upside than someone like Faker, purely because he's someone who is going to be given the keys to the kingdom by DRX, where I just don't think T1 is really ever going to be a team to do that for him. So if I had to say, I mean, it's a push. Like, at the end of the day, I'm not going to give a favorite, because at the end of the day, it's a push. But I will say that Zika has higher upside to be that player that takes over the game than someone like Faker, but he also has a much higher potential to just not be nearly as relevant towards the back half. So generally a push, but Zika has more of a chance, I think, to shine through. It's definitely going to be interesting no matter what, though. You could definitely make a case that this is the most important matchup in the series. That's going to bring us to the other of our two major matchups going into this series, as, of course, everyone is going to be looking at Faker against Zika in this series to see which mid laner is going to come out on top, but there is a pair of AD carries in this series that are going to be very interesting to watch, as we have Deft on the side of DRX taking on Gumayushi on the side of T1. Both men really trying to prove it here in the World Finals, and different things they are trying to prove. That I will definitely say. Let's talk about Deft first, because the arc of Deft making the finals in what is potentially, not confirmed, but potentially his last Worlds ever is phenomenal. And just the fact that he's able to get here has been great. I do want to say, and this is going to upset quite a few people, but it'll probably track with a lot of the things I've said about Deft over the course of the year. I think his role on this team is a little bit overstated online, just a tad bit. He's been very good over the course of this knockout stage, but really bot side is weak side for DRX. At least it has been at Worlds. It wasn't really that in the regular season. That was definitely top side, but I think it's really, like, as the year has gone on, bot side has been getting less and less attention from pretty much anybody on the side of DRX, and from anybody against DRX as well. It's one of the big traits that I would hand the team as a whole, and I talked about this a ton in the LCK analysis, was that DRX did a really good job of making sure that bot was a 2v2 for basically the entire laning phase. Whether that was because Pioshik just didn't want to invest a ton into that side of the map, or if they just didn't feel like it was necessary to invest in Deft for him to be relevant towards the back half of the game, whatever the reason ends up being, really isn't a power point early in the game on the map for DRX. And that is actually kind of shown up, I would say, a bit at Worlds. Actually, a pretty good gold difference at 15, considering how the last series went against Gen G. Deft was actually relatively behind on Ruler in basically every game that they played against Gen G, including the 3 wins that they had against them. And so to see a super positive gold difference of 15, I think a lot of that is going to be pre-Gen G matchup, but it's certainly something to keep in mind that Deft is the same exact player that I've been describing all year in my LCK reviews, which is a very solid player that you know isn't going to dominate lane phase against you if you're T1, so you don't feel like you have to invest in him a ton, but is going to be just fine playing from behind through the majority of the game because he is so consistent with how he plays towards the back half. He's never really going to be the one that kills you, but he's also never going to be not useful in any game that they play. I think he ramps up over the course of the game as it goes along. I just don't think laning phase is necessarily Deft's strength, and that could be a little bit exploitable on the side of T1. We will get into that, but it's certainly something to keep in mind. I've heard a lot of pundits and a lot of, well, internet experts, quote unquote, talk about how DRX, like, their bot lane is kind of their carry point, their focal point. You've been hearing that narrative all year long. It's something that I have vehemently tried to dispute over the course of the year. And I think as we've gotten further and further into Worlds, and quite frankly, as people have actually started to watch DRX play games, I think people have figured out, oh, this team doesn't play through bot. Yes, Deft is a good player, but this team has never played through bot lane, and so I would not necessarily consider him like a peak player. Of course, his damage per minute is going to be high. He's an AD carry main, especially considering what they end up giving to him. A lot of these early, more, I would say safe bot lanes is what I like to go for here. Caitlyn and Ashe, two of the safest champions in the game right now in the early game. We saw them bring out the Ezreal as well. They're really not afraid to just say, we're not going to be able to like super dominate this lane, but we're going to poke. We're not really going to be able to let you punish, and we're just going to kind of hope that everywhere else can go super well. And then Ashe, Caitlyn, like, they can be useful in other parts of the game. Caitlyn, not so much, but the Ashe pick that has really become super high priority for Deft over the course of the tournament, I really like that. Now, if they are going to go for more Caitlyn, it does raise the idea that they might want to play through bot more, but Caitlyn's been a pick that they've gone to relatively consistently, I should say, when it has been up at this tournament, and yet they still really haven't put a ton of attention into that bot side. So it's something to be considerate of. It's just not really DRX's playstyle. So Deft is most likely going to be left on an island. He's a very solid player, especially towards the back half, but most likely, and this is going to upset some people, Deft is just simply not going to be the one that is going to nail the dagger into you. He's going to help the team move forward, and he is a super positive piece for the team, even in the World Finals. He's just not going to be that carry presence that is going to drag them across the finish line. They're going to need players like Pioshik and players like Zika to step up in that role in order to be able to do it. Hell, even a player like Kingan might be able to get a little bit more opportunities here to be able to get that. He has gotten more of those as the tournament has gone on, but it's the exact opposite on the side of Gumayusi for T1. Like, I can't explain enough how important he has been towards this run for T1 over the course of Worlds so far. I think there's a strong case to be made that he has been the best player on T1 at Worlds. I don't agree with it, but we'll get to who I think the best player on this team has been at Worlds in the next slide, but Guma's been right up there, right? Like, 10.7 KDA, 698 damage per minute, 684 gold difference in 15. He has slaughtered everyone that he has played against. Good, bad, mediocre, it doesn't matter. He was better than Viper in the group stage by a considerable amount. He was better than Upset and Berserker in the group stage by a considerable amount. Then he gets into the bracket stage, and it does not get easier. He has to dominate Gala, and guess what? He dominates Gala. And then, yeah, he finally gets a little bit of a reprieve in Hope, who, in my opinion, is one of the weaker AD carries, ironically enough, that he's played at this tournament. That should show you the run that T1's had to have. And yeah, Guma obliterated that series. He was dominant against JDG. He has just simply been the best AD carry at Worlds so far. And if he keeps that up, I've talked about this in my World coverage, if he's able to keep that up over the course of this series, this is going to be very difficult for DRX to win. Deft is going to be in a very integral position to shut down Gumayusi early. He has very consistently been able to generate leads, and he's very consistently been able to take those gold leads and transition it basically wherever T1 wants it on the map, whether it's bot lane, top lane, Rift Herald, Dragon, mid lane, wherever, it doesn't matter. He's able to move across the map. T1 plays around him very effortlessly, and they do it on champions that are designed to be able to dominate late. Lucian Nami has been massive for T1. It's honestly something that I would expect a team like DRX to have to take away in this series, because it really isn't something that I trust Deft and Beryl on to be able to dominate like that. They're just not that playstyle in order to scale with it. But I also don't think it's a very good idea to give it over to T1. They have been exceptionally dominant. But that also opens the floor for the fact that there are other AD carries that Guma plays at a super high level. The Sivir Yumi obviously has been huge, but the Varus really has risen in priority for T1. Now, I'm not the biggest Varus fan, but Guma plays it incredibly well. He plays it incredibly succinctly as well. Now, another thing to note that Deft, has been picking up the Caitlyn when it has been left open and made available. One of the biggest quote-unquote counters to Caitlyn, at least in my opinion, in theory, is the Draven. That's something that we've seen a little bit at Worlds. It's not really worked out all that much, mostly because I think teams do need to invest a bit of resources into that Draven early to make sure that he snowballs out of control. Guma's one of the best Draven players in the world right now, and I think that could be something that maybe T1 takes advantage of. They have a bunch of other slots to maybe ban out Zika if they're not willing to, if they don't feel like they have to ban that Caitlyn, if they feel like they can pull the Draven out. It's just another thing to keep in the back of your mind when going through draft phase. Caitlyn isn't an auto ban, I would say, on the side of T1. even on red side in this series. So just some things to keep in mind. That's not to say you might want to play against it, but it just opens up more options. Overall, I would say it's pretty clear where I stand on the debate between these two players. I would say that this bot lane matchup is pretty in favor of T1. And I think a lot of people are going to be upset by that because Deft, the storyline, everything surrounding it, but Guma's just playing on a different level right now. Over the course of this tournament, he's been the best AD carry in the world, and I don't even think it's really all that disputable. There's been some really good AD carries at this tournament, but no one has really taken over games with the consistency that someone like Gumayushi has from that role. If he can keep that momentum up, Deft's not really going to have a chance to stop that. I think luckily on the side of DRX, this is what Deft does. He goes into some of the best AD carries in the entire world, and he neutralizes them. He's not necessarily going to demolish them in lane, but he's going to make sure that their impact is contained and their impact is avoidable. And so it could be a really interesting dynamic between these two players. I would say on talent level, Guma should have the advantage, especially with how he's been playing recently. But of course, anybody going against Deft is going to have a hard time, especially in what is probably the most important series that he will play in his entire life. Fifth, and finally, that is going to bring us to our final position to talk about here, and it's one that is actually a much more interesting matchup than I think it would be on paper, especially when you look at the numbers I have listed here, but it's our support matchup between DRX's Beryl and T1's Keria. Now, of course, you're probably already knowing where I'm going to go in this direction because I've been very vocal about both of these players for the entirety of the year, and I really think both of them have only proven me right over the course of this tournament so far, for good and for bad, but let's go ahead and give it a fair shakedown. Let's talk about Beryl first. Now, the biggest thing that Beryl has going for him, one, is the fact that I think he is much more willing to play these aggressive lane bully champions, things like the Heimer, things like the Lux. I think he is much more willing to pull out. Obviously, the priority on Caitlyn may raise, some prio on Lux or Morgana or something similar, but Beryl in general has always been kind of more of a mage-oriented support. Now, he wasn't that for Damwon, but you kind of look at his track record, I would say, in games that are a little bit more free-flowing. It definitely seems to be something that he at least likes to play, if not maybe his favorite playstyle. It's definitely something that I think he feels is preferable on this DRX team. I think the other big advantage that I have to talk about for Beryl on DRX here is this is a former world champion. This is someone who has been to 2 world finals before. Other than Faker, there is no one in this series who has ever been to a world finals before. And having that knowledge, having that experience is a little bit of an X factor in a series like this, especially considering he's been to 2. He's won 1, he's lost 1, he won 2020, he lost last year in 2021. Makes it for a 3rd consecutive year here on this team. Now, I'm not going to sit here and, hype him up too much because truthfully, at the end of the day, those are the big positives, I would say, for Beryl. I think his laning phase has been improved over what we saw out of him on DK or DWG or Damwon or whatever. Over the past few years, he was always that roam-oriented support that was able to create. I actually think his playstyle is almost completely swapped now. He's much more focused on the 2v2 in lane because DRX, I think, emphasizes that part of the game just a tad bit more than a lot of other teams do. And also because I do think that when he has gone for a lot of these roam plays, tried to get aggressive wards, tried to be more proactive, it really hasn't worked out for him all that much this year. I've talked about this quite a bit on the channel, but I don't know where the problem lies, but Pyosik and Beryl simply just don't have a ton of chemistry together as a jungle support duo. Oftentimes when they link up, plays go worse than if they were just on their own making these plays, and so honestly, over the course of the tournament, you can see DRX honestly even abandoning that style. Beryl really hasn't roamed all that much. They've leaned a lot more into these more push-oriented lane-style bot lanes, things like the Ashe Heimerdinger, things like the Caitlyn Lux. Hell, even the Braum pick coming out from Beryl, things that are really more oriented to stay in that lane. They're not afraid to bring out something like the Karma as well, and so I do like that adaptation coming out from DRX, because even if Beryl is significantly more well-known, I think generally speaking, for his roam-oriented style that he perfected on Damwon, it just simply has not translated to DRX this year, both either in the regular season or at Worlds. I just don't think it's been his strong suit, but I do think he's been improved as a laner, and I think that's going to be his strength. Now, I think some of the stats lie to you a bit. The 3.9 KDA certainly doesn't, but the 68.4 KP percentage, it's good, but in the context of DRX, it's not great, right? 169 XP diff at 15, that's mostly because he's sitting in lane, soaking up. He's not really making a ton of these crazy plays. Even the vision score per minute, the KDA is more indicative of what that vision score per minute actually entails. The amount of times that Beryl dies trying to get vision is more than any other support that has made it this far in the tournament by a large margin. He will sack his life walking into fog to get vision. Sometimes it's worth it, a lot of times it's not. He will just, I tweet about this all the time. By the way, if you don't follow me on Twitter, go follow me on Twitter. I tweet during the games. I talk about this all the time during the games, but it's just the amount of times where he will make such a good play in a team fight or in a play bot lane, and then immediately run it down just being in the wrong place on the map. It's actually astounding. That's the barrel that you're going to be getting. Now, can he turn it up for finals? Absolutely. This is a former world champion. We know he has this level, but it's just not really where he's been at all year long. I think a lot of people could say the same thing about Keria. However, anybody who's followed this channel knows I'm on the Keria hype train, and I've been on the Keria hype train all year long. Everybody hopped off of it in summer. They were like, oh, never mind, he's not the best support in the world. And I said, hold on. Everything's crumbling right now. Drafts are awful. He's not really being given a chance to shine. A lot of these picks in the bot lane means that he has to stay. When he is on champions that he can make plays on, things like the Renata, I actually really like how he plays, and lo and behold, when they start getting a more cohesive style going over the course of Worlds, Keria re-emerges as the best support in the world. Right now, not only is he not close to even being contested in that mark, but he's been the best player on T1 at Worlds. That's why I said, Guma has been good, but I think Keria has been better. Keria has been so sensational and has been so carry-oriented. It's kind of funny, Keria. But that Lucian Nami lane, I talked about why that is so dominant, not only because Guma's Lucian is incredibly terrifying to play into, he plays on the edge of danger so effortlessly. Sometimes he gets caught, but most of the time he really knows exactly how to position. The real danger of that bot lane is the Nami for me, because Keria's Nami is simply not like anybody else's in the world. That bubble is mostly a zoning tool at the pro level, pretty easy to avoid, but Keria just plays these mind games with everybody he plays against. He is often able to get 1 or 2 picks every single game with that ability. He's able to layer other people's CC in order for him to connect that more easily. Not to mention just his knowledge of where he needs to be on the map at any given time really raises the floor for any play that T1 wants to make, both in the mid and late game. Hell, even the early game, he's not afraid to roam mid at 5 minutes into the game. Even on something like the Nami, it's incredibly impressive how dominant and how impactful Keria has been over the course of this tournament, and if he's able to keep that up, it's really not going to be all that close in this series, in my opinion. He's the big X factor for T1. Where I said Pioshik was kind of that for DRX, I would say that Keria is the big X factor for T1. If he's the best support in the world, this series is going to be kind of hard to win for DRX, but he hasn't been that all year. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that. He definitely had some moments. I think it took a little bit of time to adapt to the Enchanter meta, but I think he's really picked up Nami, he's really picked up Renata, and hell, a lot of those engagers are still on his wheel. Like, he can still play the Alistar, he can still play, I mean, the Nautilus probably shouldn't be picked, but he can still play the Leona, or whatever, like, engage, a Mumu, whatever you want to end up playing there, he can still pull it out. It's just not been what they've done at Worlds so far. I think that makes T1 incredibly dangerous. 365 XP diff at 15. That just shows how aggressive and active he's been, because he's often leaving lane and he's still generating that XP diff. 76.8% KP percentage. That is insane. 11.4 KDM. I mean, you're just not going to find better stats than this on a support anywhere in the world for any extended period of time. He has been dominant over the course of Worlds, and if that maintains, I really have not a ton of worries about T1 in this series. So I think you can kind of take a guess as to where I'm planting my flag in terms of this support matchup. I think it's very T1 favored. I think Beryl has the potential to match, but maybe not even match. I think Beryl has the potential to step up and be a very good support. I think it's going to take a miracle for him to be able to match what Keria has been able to put out at Worlds so far. I think Beryl is going to have to play the best league he's played all year, and Keria will have to play some of the worst league he's played all year for this to be anywhere in favor of DRX. But at the end of the day, that's what World Finals is for, and one of these players has won Worlds and the other hasn't, so it's definitely intriguing, but for me, this one is definitely in favor of T1. Alright, but that is gonna do it for my lane by lane, position by position breakdown of the 2022 World Finals matchup between DRX and T1. Now it's time for the prediction. Who do I think is going to be winning the World Finals? Well, again, I think the analysis kind of speaks for itself. I do think both teams have avenues of winning. T1 significantly more through their top and their bot lane, and I would say DRX more so through their jungle mid combo if they are going to be able to push through. But if I had to put my finger on a team that I would predict to win, I'm going to say that T1 is going to be able to take this series in 4. I do a 2-game spread. My 2-game spread is T1 in 4 or T1 in 5. That's my 2-game spread. I think they should be favorites going into this, but I wouldn't be entirely stunned if DRX's momentum is simply too much for T1 to overcome. If you're not familiar, I do those 2-game spreads to give you an indication of where exactly my head is at. A 3-0 to 3-1 means it should be very in favor of one team. 3-1 to 3-2 means that it is in favor of the team that I'm picking, but I wouldn't be entirely surprised if there was an upset. And then if you're splitting 3-2, 3-2, then it's basically a toss-up. It's basically a coin flip. I don't think this is a coin flip. I think this is probably a 65% T1 favored series here. But let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Do you think that Zeus and Guma can really step up? Hell, can Faker really prove that he is the best mid in the world, the greatest player of all time? Or do you think that Zika and Pioshik and Deft can finally overcome the hurdle, can ride the snowball that they've been building throughout the tournament to a Worlds Finals victory? Be sure to let me know down in the comment section below. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. It really does mean a lot for the channel. We put a lot of effort into these videos, and we're coming to an end of the year. So if you guys have been enjoying the videos all year long, it would really mean a lot to me if you started leaving those likes for me right about now. You guys have been great about that through Worlds and through all year long. I'm just getting a little greedy towards the back half of this video. And of course, if you are new here, hit that subscribe button. I put out content like this all the time. Off-season's right around the corner. Not only am I going to be going over World Finals, but I'm going to be going over a lot of the roster moves that are kind of rolling out over the course of Worlds so far in just a couple of weeks. So if you're excited for that, hit that subscribe button. You're going to see videos coming out all off-season long. And then, of course, next year, we've got a big year as well. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.